Diabetes is certainly something that takes a lot of help, and it's a process, and it's one of the most complex things on the planet. So our goal is to help you guys and create those tools to make that transition into being a healthier individual. That's my personal goal.
So Max, I'm thrilled because this is a huge opportunity for us. No matter one person or thousands of people listen to this who can potentially improve their lives. That's our goal. Our goal is to take our lived experience, you as an elite level hockey player who also manages a very complicated metabolic disease and has learned to optimize your nutrition, lifestyle, and all these things to perform better in all aspects of your life. And I hope to bring, as well, some science and education and the lived experience of someone who also is looking to optimize their physical and cognitive performance on a day in and day out basis and translate a lot of the science that we have talked infinitely about.
Throughout my life, I've had to navigate different challenges while on my type 1 diabetes journey. Luckily, 5 years ago when I met Andrew Koutnik, he shared so much knowledge that has helped me. And now, I want to share this all with you. My name is Max Domi, and this is Andrew Koutnik, and you're listening to the In Range Podcast.
This podcast is for general information purposes only and should not constitute the practice of medicine or medical advice. The materials linked to and said in this podcast are for informational purposes only. The content in this podcast should not substitute the practice of medicine or professional medical advice. You should not delay obtaining medical advice or the treatment of a medical condition from anything you heard here in this podcast. Please seek help from a medical professional for any such conditions.
What's up, everyone? Max Domi here. Some super exciting and massive news. I've decided to start my own podcast with a very good friend of mine, Andrew Koutnik. Andrew is a super special human being to me for a lot of reasons, and it's crazy how life works. Sometimes, like, the best things that ever happen, you just fall into your lap. But met him through a mutual friend, and he is also a type 1 diabetic, as all you guys know. I am as well. And he was basically a saving grace. Essentially, he changed my life overnight, told me things that I had never known about the disease, even through like my junior ranks. And I'm in my 10th year of pro hockey now. So for him to be able to teach me stuff that I'd never learned was eye-opening to me. Changed my whole life for the better, which I've said that over and over again, and I will continue to say throughout this podcast journey. And the goal of this podcast, truthfully, from my perspective, is I want to do what he did for me, for as many people out there that experience type 1 diabetes or live with something else that might feel tough sometimes and you feel like you're alone, because at the end of the day, when you share something in common like me and this guy, and he has as much knowledge as you can, it just reminds you that you are not alone and you can legit do anything you want in your life. And the ceiling is endless in every possible way. So I was very adamant that I'm like, Andrew, we need to get you out there in the wild, and everyone needs to know who you are. Everyone needs to have exposure to your knowledge and information and expertise and all that good stuff. So I am super excited. Cannot wait for this new journey for me. I'm a newbie in the podcast world, but to share with you is a huge blessing, man. I'm very excited about this with you. So thank you very much.
Honored, Max, truly. So honor, guys, to be here. This is an opportunity to really make an impact. That's the primary goal of this, is to communicate the lived experience of myself and Max Domi to the rest of the world. How do we help as many people as possible through our knowledge, our experience, living with not only type 1 diabetes, but also having a very similar path and navigating different struggles in life. And we want everyone to understand that there are tools, there are tricks, there are things that you can apply to your life to understand you can overcome almost anything. And that's what we're here to share. When I first met Max, it was a very unique conversation. I remember getting a phone call, and I was 2020, and I got a phone call from someone and like, hey, I'd like you to speak to this person, and he has type 1 diabetes, having no idea who this person was. And I said, you could have just started with type 1. I'd talk to you right now. And we were supposed to have about a 30-minute chat, and we ended up chatting for 3 hours. And the amount that I could resonate with Max on his lived experience, his journey, the little things, he's like, yeah, I get that. I understand that. And it was so special. But we also realized at the same time, having talked for the last 4 years, that most people have no idea about half of, not even half, maybe even 10% of what we spoke about.
Yeah.
And we thought it was so important to share that with the world. What we talk about here in this show is not just for people with type 1 diabetes, although we live with type 1 diabetes every single day. It's also an opportunity to share how to improve your metabolic health, how to overcome adversity through a lot of the tools that people who have this very unique disease, where it gives you this powerful insight into your own metabolism. It also gives you a unique opportunity to learn from that and apply it to other people. And so it's an absolute honor to be here, Max.
The honor is all mine, brother.
Appreciate it, man. Truly.
Really excited.
Super pumped for this.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say about our initial interaction was, I personally, I mean, when you get to the level of I am as a hockey player, everyone thinks like you've made it and this and that. And yeah, I did make it to achieve my dreams. And now I am playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs, which is my dream as a kid. The ultimate dream is to win a Stanley Cup. So I haven't gotten there yet, but hopefully this year, and we'll work as hard as we can to get there. But with all that stuff going on, the diabetes has always been the number one part of my life. Obviously family drives everything for me. But type 1 has been a part of my life since I was 12 years old. And there was a lot of time out there as a hockey player, as an athlete, that I'm like, man, like, I just feel like they don't understand what I'm talking about. And I don't think these doctors and nurses could really actually relate to what I was going through. And I am so appreciative and like understanding of how much effort and how incredible these doctors are. And I'm so thankful. Like I said, very grateful for them. Of all the nurses and doctors that I've met along the way, they've all been a part of my journey in one way or another. And it just, at some point, it was like, okay, but then once I get out of the diabetes window, there's the hockey side, and I just feel like I was like alone. Andrew will be the first one to admit you. He doesn't know much about hockey. He does now. He knows a lot more now.
I know a hell of a lot more than I used to.
Yeah. And the coolest part was like, I'm like, dude, this guy is like talking to a doctor that's giving me advice, but he's also a type 1 diabetic. He knows what it feels like to go low. He knows what it feels like to be high. And he understands all the exercise energy systems that go with training, that go with the recovery. He understands the travel. His schedule is insane himself. So he can relate to everything I'm going through. The ups and downs, the stresses of life. He has a beautiful wife and 2 awesome kids. Like, his family's incredible. So he has this just such relatable lifestyle of something that I thought I was like the only person in the world. Obviously pretty naive to think that. There are a few of us. There's more than a couple, but finally I feel like I got someone like riding shotgun with me in this like journey that I thought I was on my own with, you know? And that itself for me was just so remarkable, because it was like, oh my God, like we haven't even scratched the surface of the potential of what I could do as an athlete for sure, but as a human being and as a type 1 diabetic. I'm like, man, like the opportunities are endless now. Like let's do it. And I learn literally something new every single time I talk to this guy. And it doesn't matter if it's for 3 hours or 3 seconds, I'm learning something new. So we are going to have hours and hours and hours and hours together. And I'm the luckiest guy in the world, because I get to sit right next to him and ask him whatever questions I want and spend as much time with him. But I'm really, truly hopeful that you guys get even just a fraction out of this of what I got from my time with him. And whether you're a type 1 diabetic or not, you'll leave that conversation super motivated to take on whatever task you have in that given day or what you're dealing with in your life. Because as a diabetic, adversity is what we battle every single day. And just like you guys do as, let's say, a normal human being. But it doesn't matter if you're an athlete or not. You're going to get just as much out of it, if not more, than I did. And I'm so excited about that. That's why I was like, I'm so adamant. I'm not a podcast guy. Obviously, was like, I'm not going to start my own podcast. Like I wasn't looking to do this, but the fact that it just made sense. I'm like, man, like we have a huge opportunity to change so many people's lives here. Very grateful for you, brother.
Max, you're the man.
Cool.
So Max, when you first were growing up, you grew up in a family of elite athletes, like elite performers. And one, what was that like? And then what was that like when you eventually found out you were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes?
It's a great question. It's something that I talk about all the time. And we've talked about it over and over again. But my father was a legendary hockey player, obviously, in the city of Toronto, which just so happens to be where I'm playing now. It's where I'm from. He played 17 years in the best league in the world, and probably in the hardest role as a tough guy. So essentially, the most senseless or selfless role in our sport. Essentially, he goes out and defends all of his teammates. He's not out there all game long. He's not scoring the insane goals. He's not getting all the credit in the world, but he has to answer the bell when no one else wants to. When the game's not necessarily going your way, he's the guy that steps up and changes the momentum or has everyone's back on the ice at all times. And that is the most valuable role. As a pro hockey player, I'm saying that in full confidence. That is the most valuable role in our sport because they're the most popular guy in the locker room. Everyone loves them. They're incredible human beings just based off of what they do. So to learn from a guy like that, just as his role, was a huge privilege, and it made me fall in love with the game. Being around guys like Matt Sundin and other Hall of Famers in our game at a young age, Mario Lemieux, Wayne Gretzky, like the best ever to play our game was because of him. And that kind of dove me headfirst into my love and passion for the game. As long as I can remember, I've had a hockey stick in my hands, and I think my mom says it better than anyone. But she's like, he could skate before he could walk, and that's probably true. So, hockey's in my DNA largely because of my father, and the athletic side of it for sure comes a lot from him. My mom, though, as well, they're both my best friends in their own way, but I'm super lucky to have both my parents here still today. And my mom, who is one of the most incredible people you ever meet, and I'm really excited for you to meet her, hopefully in the next couple of days. But she was a really good athlete too. She was more of like the long distance runner. Like she could do everything good. She played soccer, like volleyball, you name it. Like you gave her a sport she was good at. Didn't know much about hockey, but she was also the mom that like wouldn't tell you were good no matter what, but like she really didn't care. She's like, if you're having fun, like that's great. My dad was super passionate, more into that side, and he treated me like I was in the NHL from like the age of 4.
Since you're like a toddler.
Yeah. So like there's like a lot of value there, but I think you need to have both sides because then it just evens the playing field out a little bit. So I was super lucky to have 2 incredible parents. I have 2 great sisters that a lot of long car rides and cold rinks that they had to sit through, but they supported me from day one. They still do. I got a great family, man, and they mean everything to me. I wouldn't be here without them. And then you throw the diabetes into that. When I was diagnosed, it kind of just rocked.
What age were you diagnosed?
I was 12 years old. So hockey was kind of like it drove our whole family's life as it was. So I kind of felt like I was always I definitely got the most attention, and certainly my sisters give me some grief for that, but that's just the reality. Like dad was a hockey player, so like unless you guys want to play hockey, which they weren't big fans of the game at the game at the time, so it was all about my hockey. My other sisters played sports too, but hockey was it was a hockey household. So then I was 12 years old and got super sick. Was actually on my way home from Detroit. So we were in Michigan for this like prospects tournament. 12 years old, so like prospects. Like, are you kidding me? Like you're going to the States for prospects tournament? But that's just how it is for hockey in this neck of the woods. And all the top players from North America all went down. This guy, Mike Hamilton, would invite everyone down. It was the Detroit Honey Baked, and they were like literally like the Harlem Globetrotters of minor hockey. So they would just destroy everyone. But they were nice enough to invite us all down in the spring for like this really cool spring kind of tournament / training session / learn from all their coaches and cool people like yourself. So that was my first really like experience with that. And I'm like, this is sick. But there's something wrong. I was losing a lot of weight. I didn't look so good. I was getting tired. I didn't feel like myself. And it was kind of like at a weird time because we were out there against all these other top guys. I'm like, man, geez, am I not that good? Like I thought I was as good as all these guys. And I was just like really behind in a lot of ways. I couldn't keep up. My energy was just very low. I was super weak. Sure enough, I was driving back. It's about a 4-hour drive from Detroit to Toronto. And literally, man, every single gas station we drove by, I was like, Mom, I have to pee so bad. Like please pull over. And like the first couple times she's like, okay. And I'd pull over, I'd go pee, and I'd grab like the biggest thing of liquid I could find. And at the time I didn't know. So like whether it was water, Gatorade, pop, juice, like she didn't know. So I just grabbed whatever looked the best because I was so thirsty. I'm like foaming at the mouth. And that went on for 4 hours. And by like the third hour of me going to the bathroom every 10 minutes, she's like, okay, what is wrong? So I think she might have called my Aunt Trish, who's my dad's sister, and like my second mom, and she actually works at Sick Kids, one of the greatest hospitals in the world. We talked about Children's Hospital, and she was like, that doesn't sound right, Leanne. Like, you better get him in to see your family doctor. So went right to the family doc, did blood work, and he came back into the room and was like, Max, like, I don't know how to tell you this, but your blood sugar is very high. Like, I think you got diabetes. And like, the first reaction of me was like, what? Like, I had no idea what that meant. Like, it meant nothing to me. Like, okay, like, I'm not dying.
I know that feeling. Yeah, of course.
And my mom, I don't actually remember that initial reaction that she had. I'm sure we'll get her on at some point and she can talk about that. But then we went to Sick Kids that day because he was like, you got to go to Sick Kids right now. And all I cared about, I was petrified of needles, like petrified. I hated needles. It was like my phobia. So this guy's like, you have to, like, he gave me a shot of insulin because my blood sugar was like 30 millimoles or whatever it was. And he's like, you got to go to Sick Kids right now. And I'm like, I just did a needle, bro. Like, I'm done for like a week from hospitals. Like, leave me alone. And obviously, sure as shit.
For the audience, that's about 5 to 6 times normal blood sugar level.
Correct. Yeah. And I was 20 pounds lighter than I usually am at 12 years old. So I looked like a skeleton, 0 energy, 0 strength, like not in a good spot at all. So I go to Sick Kids and my mom's like in shock because it's starting to sink in for her a lot faster than me. I'm still a 12-year-old kid, but I'm old enough to know what's going on kind of, but like haven't fully grasped like the magnitude of what just happened. And so I finally get there and like we're sitting in the waiting room and I'm just like rattled because I'm like sitting there. I just want to get back to like, I'm tired from the weekend and like just had a hard camp, getting ready for the summer. I think I had like soccer coming up or whatever it was. So I'm like, I'm not even thinking about what's going on at the hospital. And then we finally meet with the endo there. His name was Dr. Perlman, and I'll never forget his face. And I love this guy. I love talking about him because he's a character. And I mean, he's a big part of my life in this specific chapter. And he basically looked at me and goes, yeah, like this is how it's going to work. You're going to have to give yourself insulin in the morning and before you go to bed. Every time you eat, you're going to have to prick your finger basically every hour or so. You're going to always have to bring juice with you. You're going to have a backpack with extra stuff. And I'm like sitting there. I'm just like, I was like the most chill kid ever, man. Like, I just wanted to be like everyone else. Like, I'm like super low maintenance. And now this guy's telling me I got to bring a backpack with all this shit. I'm like,
Pull the syringe out.
No chance, dude. Like, you want me to give myself a needle? Like, are you kidding me? Like, yeah, right. And then all of a sudden it just like hit me and I just froze. And I didn't know what to say. So my first question was, well, like, can I still play hockey? Like, because that was my life. That's all I cared about. I wanted to make the NHL. Yeah. And he looked at me and he kind of laughed. And that was the first time he just relaxed a little bit. It wasn't so much like a drill sergeant kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, okay, cool. Bring it on. You know what I mean? And at that point I was like, all right, I don't actually know the magnitude of how much this is going to be difficult, or how hard this is going to be, but it's going to be tough. And little did I know where I was going to go. And that was the initial reaction on my part. My poor parents went through a lot. We were there for 7 days. And for the next 3 years of my life, my mom was in my room at 3 a.m. pricking my finger. Because
super common,
because essentially when you first get diagnosed, there's a lot of like the hardest thing as a diabetic is actually learning about the disease because it's super complex in a lot of ways and there's a lot of moving parts. As he can talk to a lot more than me in a lot more depth. But the reality is when you're 12 years old, you can't do all this stuff by yourself. So it's just as much on the parents as it is on the individual kid. And I was super lucky, as I alluded to earlier, to have 2 great parents. And I was living with my mom. My parents were divorced and she just took it all on. And that's why like I would literally take a bullet for my mom at any point just like anyone would, but like even more so. Like I would literally do anything for my mom.
This is a fact, by the way.
Anything
Loved his
in the
mom.
world. Yes. And yeah, that's and diabetes brought me and her so close because 3 a.m. she'd just walk in and it got to the point where like if I was low, she'd crack the juice box open. It was like always apple juice. And she'd pull the straw out and like I would just be like sleeping like this. And she would just put the straw on the side of my mouth. And I like she's convinced, like I don't remember doing this, but she's like, you would just drink when you were sleeping. So I must have like learned how to just drink juice if I was low in the middle of my sleep. Like stuff like that I mean, you can't really put into words until you experience it. You're like, oh my God, this is my new normal. Like, what the hell happened? How did this happen? And it was a crazy experience, man. And I don't know what I would have done if it wasn't for my family and the great nurses and doctors at Sick Kids, because I had zero clue, like zero clue about anything to do with type 1 diabetes. I didn't even know what it meant. I didn't even know how to spell it. I'm like, this is insane. Like, what do you mean I can't have this? I can't do this, or I can go low. Like, is that dangerous? Like, yeah, you can go into a coma if you go too low. Okay, what about going too high? Is that bad? Well, yeah, same thing happens on both sides and long-term complications. You can go blind. You can lose your hand. You can lose your foot. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You didn't tell me that at the start. They're like, well, yeah, like that's where we're getting to. So it was a crazy couple of weeks, man. But that was my experience.
Do you feel like there was a moment, because when we all get diagnosed, actually your story is very similar to mine. I don't think I've ever told you my story.
No,
completely.
Can you tell us yours actually? Because I have not heard this.
My story is very similar to yours. I was
how old were you?
16 going on 17.
Okay.
I was actually just like you on a family trip.
No way.
So we were going on a family trip to Washington, D.C. And actually to back up for a little bit, because this kind of frames a lot of the story of how we're sitting here today.
Yeah.
When I was a kid growing up in adolescence, man, like I remember middle school, and I was essentially becoming heavier and heavier. And soon, before I realized, I remember the first time I was ever taught what a BMI is, body mass index. And I did the quick calculation. I knew my weight, I knew my height. I did the calculation. I'm like, oh, I'm obese. You know, I'm a kid and I'm obese. And I knew it too. Like I could look at myself and knew that physically I was obese. And that's at a stage where, you know, in middle school actually at the time, like superficial how you look is way too important. It really can take a predominant focus of your how you think of yourself.
Yeah.
And I had tried to lose weight for 5 years, you know, and, you know, if you look at the data, you know, from a scientific perspective, getting obesity in adolescence sets you up for a struggle for the rest of your life with that disease and metabolic health problems, because at its core, obesity is one of the things that can just tentacle or almost the roots of many future diseases of metabolic health. But I didn't know that at the time. I just knew I was, you know, fat and overweight, and I just hated everything about it. And I tried to lose weight for like 5 years, all different sorts of interventions, and I failed every time, as many people actually do in this journey. But I eventually got to the point where I had some help. I had some assistance with people actually keeping me accountable.
Yep.
And giving me some tools in the toolbox to actually have steps that had been verified to work before in other people. And so someone else who knew what they were doing gave me a roadmap, kept me accountable, and then I, you know, lost all the weight and was not obese anymore. That was a huge revolutionary thing for me at that time. Like, you know, when you're in middle school and transitioning to high school, because I didn't lose the weight until I was in high school. Then everything changed for me, Max. You know, people started paying attention, specifically, you know, girls. And I was like, oh, this is great, man. This is basically the only reason I did this, by the way, you know. And but I'll just.
Sorry, how old were you when you looked at yourself and you said I'm obese?
Man, I must have been like 10 or 11.
And what was your definition of obese at that point?
Well, when I realized that I had a problem was when I started just gaining weight. And it wasn't like my family, just like yours, was very active. My father had run marathons. My mom had run marathons. My uncle, who was a huge inspiration in my life, had run maybe 24 to 30 marathons, had climbed mountains, had done multiple century rides. Like he was a champion of champions. And
incredible.
Yeah. And his name was John. He was just such an impactful figure. My father and my mother at the time did similar things. They'd both run marathons, half marathons. We're active every day. We ate right, so to speak,
Yeah.
quotes around that. And so I should not have fallen into this trap, so to speak,
Yeah.
but I did. And it had profound impact on the way I viewed myself. But when I eventually had someone provide tools, give me guidance, I was able to find success, and a lot about why we're sitting here today is an opportunity to do the same thing for other people and to just not tell anyone what to do, but to share our lived experience to help others. And after I had lost the weight, it was a year later, totally disconnected from one another, that I was on this family trip in Washington, D.C. So again, just like you, not at home. I was sitting in the Tallahassee airport in Tallahassee, Florida. That's where I grew up. And I just got my gut just started to wrench. I felt like nauseous. And I'm thinking, oh man, like I should go, what do you do when you're nauseous? Well, old school. My mom was like, okay, here's some sugar and some bread, or, like I had, I know I had a Sprite. I'm pretty sure I had a Gatorade with that. And if you know anything about type 1 diabetes, and you'll learn more as you guys listen, that's the worst thing you could have done in that moment. But that's what I thought was going to help. And so I drank a ton of sugar to calm my stomach. And what I actually didn't realize is I was exacerbating the progression of my disease in rapid fashion. Get on the airplane and just sitting down, some AC helped, but I never started to feel better. At this point, I'd lost weight. I was active. I had learned that exercise is important. Nutrition was important. And we started walking around Washington, D.C., and I'm thinking, I feel like shit.
Yeah.
Like I was so fatigued. It was unbelievable. Little did I know at this moment that a part of my body that was one of the most important aspects of metabolism, frankly, the most important hormone, or the king of metabolism, in my opinion, insulin, was rapidly lowering, if not to almost zero levels. And
Yeah.
I was on a rapid progression to, as many kids are, if they don't know this, either getting diagnosed and getting on insulin or sometimes dying. And that is the truth. If kids don't find this out in rapid fashion, they get into something called diabetic ketoacidosis. For people who don't understand this, it's kind of irrelevant, but the main factor is that you're quickly going to progress to fatality. You will die if you don't get insulin very quickly and bring down the acid level in the blood. And so I'm walking around. So not only am I walking around nonstop, I'm drinking sugary drinks thinking this is helping me. So my blood sugar is going through the roof. I'm walking around, so I'm active. So that's kicking what is these ketone bodies that produce the acid from your liver is going higher and higher. So I'm just I'm just screwing myself, right? I'm not knowing it.
Yeah.
And I remember being below the Washington Monument, just laying on my back with thinking that my belt was the reason my gut was hurting so bad. So I'm just laying there with like my pants unbuckled and like my belt open. I'm like 16, you're probably looking at this kid over here like, something's wrong with this kid. He's on his back with his pants unbuttoned, just suffering. And it was at that night, Max, just like you, where you guys were stopping and getting waters all the time. I stopped at a restaurant, and that evening we drank. The exact number I think I counted it was 14 glasses of water that were 16 ounces over a 2-hour dinner. Or it was something very close. It was an absurd amount. I mean, like you have ice and other things in it, so the exact amount is whatever. But I, just like Max experienced, urinating excessively and not realizing at the time that's because of these absurdly high glucose levels. Your body's just doing everything to save you in this moment and just spilling it out.
Yeah.
And without insulin, one of the only ways to do that is through the urine. But it's not an effective tool. It's just one way to do it. So you peeing all night, and the next night, same thing. I drank these pitchers that pour water.
Yeah.
They gave me 2 of those just at the table and just gave it to me. And I threw up for 14 hours straight that night. A lot like you, had a family member. My grandmother was a nurse, and my mom reached out to her. We were trying like nausea medication, again, sugary drinks, seeing if it was going to help. I remember my tongue felt like cardboard because I could not consume water, no liquid whatsoever, no food whatsoever was staying in it. Actually, it got to the point where about halfway into this, I started drinking it just to have the sensation, because I knew, regardless, even though I knew I was going to throw it up within seconds. And then my mom called my grandmother, who's a nurse, and said, what should I do? And she said, take him to the hospital immediately.
Yeah.
And so I was taken to the hospital. My blood sugar I don't know, we'll figure out the millimolar conversion, but it was 596 milligrams per deciliter, averages 70 to 120. So I was actually, if we do a direct conversion, that's about 6 times normal. And
just so everyone knows, like, what I live in Canada, Andrew lives in the States, obviously. So the metric for us is millimoles per. Is it just millimoles?
It's millimoles,
and then milligrams per deciliter is for you guys. So like, in good range for me would be like 4.4 on the lower end for me as an athlete, to like on the high end, you want to say like below 8 millimoles probably. I mean, for him, it's much tighter than that, but that's what I try to do. And then on your end, it's, what is it, 17 times? No.
So the range is like a 70 to 120. I think that converts down to around mid 4s to mid 5 range.
Okay.
In millimoles. And so I get, just like you, I was around 6 times higher. So I think we were actually pretty similar in blood sugar if we're converting this correctly. Someone's definitely going to correct us if we're wrong. So we'll find out.
We'll figure that out after. But that's high, dude.
Yeah, it was absurdly high. I had no idea how dangerous that was. And and they tell you,
you're still in Washington at this point.
I'm still in a hospital in Washington, D.C. And just like you said, how do I get out of here? You know, like, I don't care about what they're like. Oh, I remember they said they came in, your blood sugar's 596 and you have type 1 diabetes. They said it to me like, I'm going to know what the fuck this means.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, cool. So how do I go home and play video games? Like, how do we get out of here real quick?
Yeah.
And actually, I ended up staying in the hospital in the ICU actually for 7 days. And then we stayed in the general hospital for another 7 days, trying to learn everything you could possibly learn to walk out that door and survive. And that was everything you could learn about nutrition. How does insulin relate to the nutrition you're eating? How do you take this extremely potent, powerful molecule of insulin that could literally, in its absence, kill you? Because it almost killed both of us in its absence when we ended up in the hospital. But if you have too much of it, it will also kill you.
Yeah.
But this is the tightrope that we walk. You know, we talk sometimes about the highs and lows, but it's also this fine line that we're trying to walk constantly with type 1 diabetes. And you're given this vial of some of the most powerful metabolic, one of the, in my opinion, the most powerful metabolic molecule you could possibly give yourself, and asked to inject it every single day for the rest of your life.
That's insulin, by the way.
Yes, insulin. And it will have profound impacts on your metabolism. It will have profound impacts to a degree that I never appreciated until I got research on how you feel.
Yeah.
Right here, right now, at every single meal, every single day, and for the rest of your life. There's no cure for this disease, but this also is relevant to other people in that it might not be type 1 diabetes that someone is diagnosed with. It could be a struggle in their personal life. It could be a struggle with a different medical, maybe they're dealing with obesity or type 2 diabetes or some disease that in our case wasn't our choice, or in some cases maybe a choice for someone. And it allows them an opportunity to realize that, we both started at a place where we were we were on the thin edge, thin ice, and we were close to dying, both of us. I mean, that was what diagnosis is. It's real close to that. And I've known people who didn't make it past that.
And I think that's something too, that a lot of people, a lot of this from our perspective is, if you're not a type 1 listening to us, we're going to talk about lots of other things that are type 1, but this is what means the most to both of us and what we specialize in, especially him. But like, it's a serious disease. And you can make an argument that there is nothing like it. And we're going to get into like everything listening to what you just said. Like, I have so many questions that we can go in so many different ways. But the one thing that I wanted to ask you off the hop is, how would you say it changed your life? Like, instantly, like when you got that diagnosis and all this stuff happened, and in that crazy 7 days stopped of being like, okay, like I didn't die, so given another opportunity at this thing called life, this is what I have to do moving forward. Like, what did the next little chapter look like for you? Like, how did you dive right into it as like as an academic, so to speak? How did that all come into that? This is your number one passion in the world.
Yeah.
In my opinion, you're top 3, top 5 in the world when it comes to this. And I refer to you as an expert because you've been able to answer someone with as a complicated a life as me. You've answered every single question. And if you haven't, you've figured it out yourself. You know what I mean? And that to me is something that is such a insane skill that no one else seems to have. And I'm just like curious, did you always have that passion for learning about type 1 diabetes, or how did that all evolve? Why did it become such a big part of your life?
Yeah, I remember to your original question, I remember walking out, coming home from the hospital, and when it really sunk in for me was when I went down to eat my first meal. And I thought,
At the hospital?
no, I was at the hotel we were staying at.
Okay.
Yeah. And I remember sitting down at that breakfast and depression just flooded over me.
Really, eh?
Yeah, because I realized, man, I gotta do math in my head. So I had to understand what this food is in front of me.
Yeah.
Not only do I have to understand it, I realized like in that moment I need to be a world expert of basically everything I could possibly consume. How many the calories, the macronutrients, so like carbs, protein, and fat. I needed to understand all of it because the amount of this life-saving drug that could also kill me.
Yeah.
I needed to know the exact precise amount that I needed to give in that moment, or and knowing full well that I might not. I didn't appreciate in this moment, Max, that how often it's almost an impossible game to truly get it right every single time. It was just overwhelming, the amount of information I knew I was going to have to gather.
Yeah.
And the second layer to that was that I realized I was going to pull a syringe out in public, knowing all the stigma that comes along with a syringe. Like what
Yeah.
before you were diagnosed, what did you think of a syringe, Max? What would you attach that with?
Heroin, probably. Drugs, like, yeah.
Yeah. Steroids or
By the way, I've never done heroin, obviously.
just in
Just wanna
case you
clear
didn't
that
know.
But no, I don't know. Like, and if you think of a syringe, it's like a tough trip to the doctor's office when you're sick, like the flu shot. But other than that, like drugs, you know, like, I mean, it was never anything good. That's for sure. Like if you're getting a needle, it certainly wasn't good, but now it's keeping us alive.
Exactly.
It was crazy. Like that shift in mindset was like, what? Like this is now my life. I'm going to be injecting myself with that.
I immediately took the stance of pity on myself. You know, I was immediately depressed. I thought this is really fucking unfair.
Yeah.
To me to have to do all this extra stuff to try to understand something that it was my choice. You know, like this isn't my fault. But I remember 2 weeks in that I was, because when I lost all this weight, I thought, you know, what's the opposite of being obese? You know, like, and the only thing you can visually see that's extreme in the opposite direction is bodybuilding.
Yeah.
And I had become obsessed with that. I wanted to be as big and as jacked as possible, Max. That's all I wanted. And, you know, I was just compensating hardcore. That's all I was doing. And, but when I realized that bodybuilders, you know, you go on these forums online, the back end of the internet, I realized that there's bodybuilders who are abusing this drug, insulin, and who didn't have type 1 diabetes. I'm like, okay, there's clearly something powerful about this. And it shifted my whole mindset in that moment towards, how do I optimize this disease? How do I take this disease, which you have to micro-regulate so many different aspects of your health, well-being, and understand how to be an expert on nutrition and other aspects of medication and insulin needs for food. So I took this micromanagement approach. I took this idea of, how do I learn everything I can possibly learn about this disease, because there's got to be some way to turn this into a win to be bigger, stronger, faster. Yeah. And so I tracked every gram of what I was eating every day.
So that was what drove you, though, is to get jacked.
That was my primary drive. It was all because I had grown up as this kid.
No, that's what I mean. Like, it's fascinating to me because I was lucky because I had hockey, and that was it's pretty easy to figure out if it was successful or not. You either win the game or lose the game, or you look good or you don't. You score a goal or you don't. You know what I mean? But like, I always wondered, like, if you're not an athlete and you can't measure your success based off of your performance, and you're just a normal kid and you get diagnosed, like, how do you handle that? And like, what kind of motivation do you have? So like, it's so interesting to hear you say that, because I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense. If you were obsessed with losing weight and looking jacked and looking big, and you're a big guy, like Andrew's 6'5". I mean, that's why we're sitting down. Just want to make that very clear, because I look the same size as him. He's a foot taller than me. But no, it's like, that to me is so fascinating, because I'm curious, like every other kid or adult that gets diagnosed with type 1, quite frankly, if you don't have something that like is your is your fire inside of you.
Yeah.
That's got to be like a super challenging feat, because you talk about depression and anxiety and all the stuff that comes with that news of getting diagnosed, and the harsh reality of like your life just changed. Like if you don't have that thing to like use that as your fuel, like that's got to be tough.
It was, yeah, it is. And I think for everyone, it doesn't, there's no judgment on what that thing is for that person.
Absolutely.
But having something to latch yourself onto and be inspired by. And I remember you said this to me, Max, yesterday, and it's true. We all are just looking to understand that we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
First of all. And once we realize we're going to be okay, we want inspiration to understand who else has done it. And it's interesting. I never thought about this until you brought this up about Bobby Clark.
Yeah.
That I used to look, I looked for bodybuilders who were like, who is type 1? And when I looked at him, I'm like, man, that guy is like, I was like, this guy's different. He's got something extra special about him.
Yeah.
And so it gave me something in that moment, although, you know, luckily I've kind of faded. At that time it was so important to me, but you know, something like bodybuilding where it's so subjective, you're giving the power in other people's hands, you know, on how you feel. And sports, it's you score, you don't, you know, which is in my opinion, we could talk about that in another episode, the consequences of one choice versus the other.
Yeah.
But to your original point, that fuel of being obese, losing the weight, realizing the impact that things like lifestyle, nutrition, and exercise could have on my health, and then realizing that went to a whole different level when you have type 1 diabetes. Everything you ate would have a direct impact on your blood sugar levels. Then you would need to know how much insulin to give to make sure you kept that as tight as possible. And the level of insights it gives into metabolic health is frankly something that most people, like elite athletes or someone who's trying to find out everything about their internal biology, would kill for. The insights that having the type 1 diabetes gives, because you're tracking glucose, you're tracking insulin 24/7. In my opinion, the two most important molecules in our metabolism, and you get direct feedback about how much insulin you need, how it's going to regulate your glucose. And I was fascinated by that.
Yeah.
And so I went into school just to study. You know, I never actually had I didn't plan to be like where I am right now.
Yeah.
Like a researcher who has done X, Y, and Z and studied health, disease, and performance. I went into it just like, what do I enjoy learning? Like everyone where I grew up, everyone's like, you go to school, that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I'm in school, not because I had a plan. I had no plan. Okay. I had zero plan, none. Okay. And I ultimately just kept pursuing things I was passionate in. I was passionate about understanding how like exercise physiology. So I went to Florida State University. I got a degree in exercise phys, actually ended up doing research there on health and disease and in kind of unique physiologic response to how does your mental state, how do stressors like cold and other metrics actually affect your something called your cardiovascular health. So this attachment between things like disease or attachment to how you actually are mentally in your mental state to your actual underlying health. After that, I wanted to really focus in on nutrition, because if you live with type 1 diabetes, you will appreciate at some point that nutrition has, if not the biggest, one of the biggest impacts on your disease. And I was dead set on understanding as much as I could about nutrition's impact on disease and joined a lab called the Metabolic Medicine Lab.
I will interrupt though, because nutrition, he's always right in a lot of ways, but where he's wrong there, it is number one. It is number one by such a country mile. And I wish I knew this before I met him, because after meeting him, it's my number one. But before, I never actually believed it was number one, because I didn't think it was going to be something as simple as just you eat this and your life becomes a lot easier. And I am an active pro athlete that relies on my body functioning at its highest possible peak performance level. Nutrition is number one. That's a fact.
Yeah, we know that nutrition and health and disease is a foundational component to just being well.
And we're going to talk about that a lot on this podcast.
Absolutely. It's critical to living a well-lived life, to have high quality of life, to understand the impact nutrition has on how you feel, and the impacts it has not only on just day-to-day quality of life, but actually long-term health, things like aging. And in our case, in type 1 diabetes, the impacts are quite big. The implications are quite large. In fact, someone with our disease is expected to have at least one long-term major complication, medical complication beyond type 1 diabetes. We're expected to have either retinopathy, neuropathy, nephropathy. These are all like where your eyes start to you lose vision, where your nerves stop to respond to stimulus, where your kidneys stop to be able to filter a lot of the key molecules in your blood. That's frankly expected with this disease. Yeah. And a part of why we're sitting here today, and you talk about nutrition is a core component amongst many others, but in type 1 diabetes, it is the number one most important factor in regulating key biomarkers of health with this disease. And it's important to appreciate how not just people with type 1, but people who don't have type 1 diabetes, what are those tools? What is an appropriate nutritional strategy? And that's exactly why I went and studied at University of South Florida, the Morsani College of Medicine there, to study food as a medical intervention to diseases. But at the same time, we also worked with trying to understand, because I was always fascinated about performance, right? Because I've grown up this obese kid, but I also wanted to translate that to performance and bigger, stronger, faster philosophy. And so I helped design and run two projects on something called NASA NEMO, where we worked with astronauts, elite level researchers who actually were training to go to Mars, and just trying to understand the physiology of this extremes and the highest of performers in the world. I mean, astronauts are if you think about operational performance, some people think about performance max, about max on the ice. Did you do your job? Did your teammates score a goal, or did you score a goal? It's viewed in that lens. Yeah. But performance is well beyond physical performance. Yeah. It's also cognitive performance. Yeah. It's operational performance.
It's also life and death in certain things. The reason why I say life and death is, to me, as an athlete, if I make a mistake, okay, yeah, sure, I get hit, or the puck ends up in my net, or we lose the game. Or if one of my teammates makes a mistake, or a coach makes a mistake, or a referee makes a mistake, it's a game.
Yeah.
I would never actually, I don't believe that, but that's the harsh reality of my life. And I care about hockey more than basically anything in the world. And so that is my life and death, is winning every individual game in a series or trying to get a championship. That is my life and death. But the reality is there's situations and companies that you worked with where life and death is actually like a legit thing. You know what I mean? And when you look at the special forces guys that you've worked with and the NASA people you worked with, like to me, like those guys to me are the most amazing, incredible people, especially as an athlete, because at the end of the day, like we're just playing a game. Like those guys, their lives are at risk. You know what I mean? And so I'm so fascinated to learn more about that, because that is just another ball game, you know, and there's just so much more on the line, and you have direct experience with those kind of people. And Andrew's very humble, but he's worked with some of the most incredible people in the world, because he is one of the most incredible people in the world. And I want you to just talk about a bit about that for sure, because I think people need to understand, like, first of all, more about how incredible you are, but also how incredible some of those amazing people are that you worked with about that stuff.
Yeah, when we were doing the project with NASA NEMO and just trying to understand physiology and extremes, like how do these people operate at the elite level in these extremes, and how does their biology respond to that? Again, it comes back to this core of just trying to understand more about our metabolism, how is it regulated, and working with that. And also, I went on to work at an institute that had funding from Special Operations Command, and so we got a lot of feedback and integration of understanding their needs, what they had to do. And you meet these guys, and it's frankly some of the most impressive people you'll ever meet in your life. I can say that right now, standing here at 35 years of age, that was the most impactful community I've ever engaged with, because you realize when you meet them, one, they have to operate at the most elite end. Okay. So it isn't just like, hey, are they the fastest? So they Usain Bolt, they're the fastest at 100 meters. Yeah. Or no, it's not just that. It's physical and also cognitive performance that integrates into an operational task, what is termed operational performance. And they deal with some of the highest pressures in the world, and developing tools and strategies and how to improve their health, resilience, and performance is, again, you may only be moving the needle 1, max 5% because they're already the best in the world, but you're also, that 1 to 5% could mean life or death. And it's interesting because there's an analogy there to, not every day with type 1 diabetes is it life or death, but you are walking this tightrope on a regular basis of understanding how to, 1, be healthy, 2, use the tools and strategies in your life to achieve that, and then 3, ultimately we all want to perform in life, whether it's in our relationships, in our career, in your case, in elite level hockey, in the NHL, in a game by game basis. And we'll talk more about this, but he's an absolute savage. Talk about some of his blood sugar regulations, his mental state during the playoffs. He's like he's a stone cold killer, man.
But I got to ask one more thing before we wrap on this initial thought. There's 2 parts to this question, and just literally do me a favor and just bang out like the 6 points that I've seen in your TED Talk. I want you to first explain the complications that we can potentially deal with.
Yeah.
But can you just speak on like the life expectancy and how that's affected other stuff like the extremes that are scary to hear, especially for us as type 1s. But just so people are aware of like what's at stake for us. And the second part of that question is, after you do that, and I just want you to explain in like a minute, maybe 2. I know it's gonna be really tough, but if anyone can do it, you can. Just explain, if someone doesn't know, like you're talking to me, the 11-year-old Max. What is type 1 diabetes? Like, I actually would love to know your just quick synopsis. If you're talking to a little kid or someone that has no clue what that means, what does that mean?
And I'm gonna put this in as concise as possible, because I know in our forthcoming episodes, for those who are tuning in, that we're going to dive into that in the next one. Is type 1 diabetes is a disease where you lose the ability to regulate your glucose. You no longer produce insulin, and that is called, insulin deficiency. And as a result, every single meal of every day, you now have to administer insulin, often guessing the exact amount of dose, the dose you need to regulate glucose in this very tight range. It is a very, very difficult task. And we talk about this. You're often riding the highs and lows, and you are walking a tightrope when managing this. But what's at stake? And the reason we talk about what's at stake is because it's incredibly important to understand why we want to even have this conversation and have this discussion, because we want to help people understand that it is absolutely possible to overcome these challenges, these complications that are just expected of people, of me and Max. But people with type 1 diabetes, due to high and variable glucose levels, which often accompanies the average management of type 1 diabetes, are expected to live anywhere between 11 to 18 years shorter on average in the developed world, where the access to tools and technologies are readily available to the vast majority of people who can at least get access to things like medical care. And beyond that, you're also expected to have at least one long-term complication. You're at tenfold higher risk for cardiovascular disease, exceptionally higher, which is like heart disease. You're at much higher risk for things like neurodegenerative disorders. You're at much higher risk for basically all 10 of the leading causes of death. But those are long-term complications. On the short term, you're also expected to ride the highs and lows. That is the expectation of living this disease. You're expected to have the goal in type 1 diabetes is something called time in range. So 70, 180. And just getting 70% is the target range that is put out there by medical institutions. But it's nowhere near normal. In fact, most people's average blood sugar level is around 180 with a standard deviation of 60 above and 60 below, which means the total range of deviation, Max, is 120 milligrams per deciliter. Most people's average deviation standard deviation is 10 if you don't have diabetes. And so this leads to these increased risks. This leads to these shortened life expectancies. And it's a choice and a decision every single day about how you're going to attempt to manage this.
Yeah.
And I say it's a choice because people often describe type 1 diabetes and your attempt to regulate it as not a choice. Like it is just, you just eat what you want, take insulin for it, just try to get in this range, whatever you can do. Yes, do the best you can, but also understand you have a choice, and there is tools available for people out there that often aren't talked about that help people get remarkable outcomes. And that's why we're here.
Those are the legit hard numbers. That's the honest truth. We're never going to lie to you guys. We're going to speak from experience. I wanted him to say that, and I wanted you to say that to them, because to hear a scientist in one of the best researchers in the world and a type 1 himself that lives with all this stuff with a pro athlete telling you the same thing, that's what would happen if you decide to do this. Our goal, and my goal, and I'm sure Andrew's goal, is to allow that to no longer be just the norm. We're going to change the norm so that you guys could live like we do, which certainly is much, much, much healthier than that, while living the crazy, insane lives just like everyone else does. So it is 1000% attainable. You can do it and you will do it. But our goal is to educate you guys as much as we possibly can on creating a toolbox that you need to allow those numbers to be relevant to you. Because 70% in range, to me, just doesn't cut it. It really doesn't. And there's no need to think that that should just be the average, you know? And I'm the first one to tell you that you either win or you lose, but I'm also super understanding. And I require people to work with me that have a lot of patience because it takes time. And I understand that. And Rome was not built in a day. Diabetes is certainly something that takes a lot of help, and it's a process, and it's one of the most complex things on the planet. So our goal is to help you guys and create those tools to make that transition into being a healthier individual and live a long, happy life. So those numbers are irrelevant. That's my personal goal.
So Max, I'm thrilled because this is a huge opportunity for us, no matter one person or thousands of people listen to this who can potentially improve their lives. That's our goal. Our goal is to take our lived experience, you as an elite level hockey player who also manages a very complicated metabolic disease and has learned to optimize your nutrition, lifestyle, and all these things to perform better in all aspects of your life. And I hope to bring, as well, some science and education and the lived experience of someone who also is looking to optimize their physical and cognitive performance on a day in and day out basis, and translate a lot of the science that we have talked infinitely about to those out there also attempting to improve their lives. And I just want to say I'm excited for this journey, Max.
Thanks, buddy. Excited to do it with you.